Rose squeezed the sketch against her chest, then held it out at arm's length before folding it into force and placing it into her pocket. "I'll take great care of it," said Rose. "It's okay. If it gets lost or anything, I can always make you another one," said Samuel. Rose smiled at him. Samuel smiled back at her. They held each other's gaze for a while. Rowan, who had been watching the entire thing through half-lidded eyes, closed them and continued resting. Good for them, he thought to himself before he began dozing again. Averlee was studying the runes to a spell that created fire underneath whatever the spell was set under. She thought it would be useful for setting up camps for the night to keep warm if she were able to set the fires when everyone was tired, or if they were unable to find suitable materials when they were in the middle of nowhere. She wasn't doing the whole spell in case it accidentally fired, causing the carriage to go up in flames. She had seen a whole section of a town go up in flames when she was a child, and it had terrified her. She still remembered the sight of the massive fireball as it engulfed the insides of the building nearest her as she ran between the buildings and the heat from it. It was going well, though, and the runes were launching, glowing a faint red when completed properly, and she felt that cold feeling focusing in her mind and out through the locket from around her neck, which she found both soothing and enjoyable. She was currently working on getting the shape of the triangular ruins housing's angles right. The two outer angles were wider than the middle one, and if she didn't get them equal, the markings that went around them didn't fire at all, which was frustrating. She practiced drawing the triangle over and over again on the page that Samuel had given her of his sketchbook with the pencil he had lent her. She was getting the shape down, and the work was relaxing and passing the time well enough. She knew it was getting better as each time the spell completed successfully. The steady feeling that filled her head felt as though it was widening, and that the marking on her face warmed slightly, felt as though someone was giving it a gentle touch. It wasn't unpleasant, like a caress, but she barely noticed it. Mostly what she felt was the heavy weight of the locket resting against her chest as it echoed against her each time she completed her part of the spell. Its calming effect washed over her with each completed triangle, and her paws steadied with each repeated movement. She increased her speed without noticing until the remaining space on the page was covered in equally spaced and properly aligned triangles. Averlee blinked and put the pencil down. There were scores of triangles on the page. Had she really drawn all those that quickly? It was just hard to judge how much time had passed as the carriage made its way down the road. The continuous hiss of the wheels on the road lulled the hypnotic song that dulled the senses. Averlee placed the pencil on the page, marking the spell in her book, and closed it. She looked up. No one was really doing anything. Samuel was sketching something, Barkland was reading quietly, Rose was dozing in her seat again, and Rowan appeared to be doing the same. Averlee stretched her arms over her head and looked out the window. The trees passed by for as far as the eye could see. There wasn't much to look at, to be honest. She sat back in her chair and looked down at the page. Better try the next runes then, thought Averlee, opening the book and reaching for the pencil once again. She began working on practicing each of the runes while the carriage headed on down the road and the sun continued towards down the horizon. They made it to the edge of the forest, where a sign planted firmly in the dirt in the middle of the road stated matter-of-factly that it was indeed the end of the road, and that the marsh trail was starting. Daniel pulled the carriage up to the sign and stopped and got out. He walked over to the side of the carriage and opened the door to let the others out. The group exited the carriage and walked to the trunk and unloaded their gear. Daniel undid the clasps, holding their weapons in place on the side of the inside of the trunk. Rose was glad to see that her staff was completely unharmed from the upheaval earlier that day. When they were done, they walked to the side of the road and stood by the sign. "Well, we were able to get here," said Samuel cheerfully. Daniel smiled. "Yes, thank you for fixing the wheel. You obviously did a great job. I should be able to get home by morning, which will be great," said Daniel. "You're not going to wait until the next day to start driving?" asked Barkland. "Oh no, our shifts for short runs like this are 2 or 3 days, and we get a nap for a few hours when we get tired, but we have to get back as soon as we possibly can. It's just part of the job," said Daniel. "Oh, I see. That must be hard," said Rose. "It's not so bad once you've gotten used to it. Plus, the lights on the carriage are pretty good," said Daniel. "You may want to check to make sure they weren't damaged in the accident," said Rowan. "Oh, I did that before we got going again. Standard procedure," said Daniel. Daniel smiled at the group, taking off his cap and holding it between his paws. "Well, I should start heading back then. It was a pleasure getting you here. If you ever need our services again, please feel free to contact us again. And thanks again for fixing the wheel so well," said Daniel, walking over to Samuel and shaking his paw. Samuel smiled. "It wasn't a big deal. Thanks for letting me use your tools to do it. Made it easier," said Samuel. The group waved as Daniel turned around and drove the carriage down the road, a plume of dust and dirt rising behind him. He was gone from sight shortly after. They turned towards the trail. Averlee turned towards Rowan. "Do we want to camp early for the night and hit the trail in the morning, or do we want to walk the trail until it gets dark?" asked Averlee. Rowan thought about it for a moment. "Well, we saved almost 2 days' travel, even with the day's trouble, so we wouldn't lose anything by stopping now, not to mention that the road is wide enough for us to camp quite comfortably for the night. We have no idea how the trail will treat us. Let's enjoy our first night on level ground, shall we?" asked Rowan. The group agreed. and began going through their rucksacks, pulling out the smaller bags they had marked with pens, denoting what was inside, pulling out their tents and the night's rations. They set them up in a circular pattern in the middle of the road underneath the sign and gathered fallen branches and kindling underneath the afternoon sun. They relaxed while they waited for it to get dark enough to have a fire. When it was time, Avery pulled out the piece of paper she had been working on and placed it on the ground in the center of the tents. Barklin arranged the firestones he had brought around wood he placed on top of it, and Avery finished the spell. The paper ignited and the wood smoldered and caught fire almost immediately, smoking in the twilight. They ate their rations and enjoyed the fire, laying on their bedrolls as the stars came out between the trees and the night sky. When they were done eating, Ron sat back on his bedroll. "Would you like to hear a story from my youth?" he asked. Rose naively nodded. Sammy was busy chewing on his vegetable jerky and unable to respond properly. Barklin was reading, but offered a yes as he turned the page of his book. "All right, how about I tell you a story about one of your parents, then?" asked Rowan. "That would be good. We never get to hear about what they were like when they were younger," said Rose, leaning on both arms as she laid down both feet in the air. "Okay, how about Elizabeth Alvern, then?" said Rowan. "Mum?" asked Barklin. "Oh, yes, I had many stories about your families when they were younger, but I think you'll enjoy this one. It's sort of funny," said Rowan. "Okay, I guess," said Barklin, unsure of himself. He put his book down and sat cross-legged on his bedroll. "It starts when we were all young, younger than you all are now. It begins at the Misselhop orphanage." "Did you know she was an orphan?" asked Rowan. "No," said Barklin. "She doesn't like to talk about it much," said Rowan. "Is she ashamed of it or something?" asked Averly. "I don't think so. She just doesn't talk about herself to others a lot, including me," said Barklin. "Well, she was an orphan, and before she was adopted by a Badger family in Misselhop, she lived in the orphanage and went to the school that you all went to as younglings." "Applecrumb?" asked Rose. "That's the one," said Rowan. Rowan leaned forward over the fire. "There happened to be a fair number of young orphans that went to Applecrumb when your parents were younger. Not all of them nice," said Rowan. "Did some pick on her?" asked Rose, leaning forward herself. "Oh, yes, she had her share of bullies, but I'm going to tell you about the worst one she had, and the way she got back at him for picking on her," said Rowan. "You see, Elizabeth is a bit of a thinker. She likes to plan." Rowan laced his fingers together. Barklin leaned forward, caught up in the beginnings of the story. "There was this little gang, you see, run by this crow who went by the name of Andy. He was an odd crow. Most crows are dark as night and shine iridescently under the sun. Andy was different. He was bright white and with feathers tended to shine with the faint shimmer from the sun that caught you in the eye if you looked at him wrong. He always had a chip on his shoulder about it, too. I don't think he liked being different and would take it out on others when he could," said Rowan. "Not a very nice fellow," said Averly, disapprovingly. "No, not really. Though he was a very pretty-looking bird. He always had a scowl on his face, though, so it tended to mar his look a bit," said Rowan. Barklin stirred the fire with a long branch and placed the branch to the side of the pit. Rowan continued with the story. "Andy would raise hell when it came to Elizabeth and her friends, picking on them with his little gang of friends whenever they got the chance, making their lives a misery, knocking their lunches out of their paws, stealing them when they got the chance, pushing them down, outright fighting with them when the teachers or the folks running the orphanage weren't looking," said Rowan. "Was Andy an orphan as well?" asked Samuel. "Surely was. He lived under the same roof that Elizabeth did, ate at the same long table for dinner and breakfast with her, and went to the same adults to get bandaged up after their fights. You would think they would make peace with each other and get along, but it wasn't until Andy pushed her too far and she got him back right and proper so that he calmed down and played nice," said Ron. "What did she do?" asked Averly. "She planned is what she did. You see, Andy was predictable. After each day, Andy and his two best friends would go for a walk around the orphanage grounds through the apple orchards. Each day, like clockwork, they would go around the walls and do laps. Well, after a particularly bad week of bullying, Elizabeth had had enough and started thinking of what she was going to do to get back at him. She started to think of ways to maximize her revenge. The orphanage had those apple orchards next to them. They would bottle the juice and sell the apples to help fund and feed the animals staying in the buildings. Those running it had been planting the lines of new trees the few weeks previous, and had bags of soil and had left a large pile of bags of soil in the corner of the orchard. One night, one of the bags disappeared from the pile. The next night, a long wooden plank disappeared from the tool shed, along with the wheelbarrow that was frequently used throughout the fields. Elizabeth had figured out what she was going to do. The next day, when Andy and his friends took their evening walk around the wall of the orchard, Elizabeth rolled the wheelbarrow with the plank and bag of soil out to the end of the wall. When she got to the end of it, she dumped the contents of the wheelbarrow out and flipped it upside down. She placed the plank on the wheelbarrow and tossed the bag of soil down on it. She split the bag of soil down the middle and readied herself. Elizabeth waited until she could hear the voices of Andy and his friends making it down the path, and just as they passed by her, she jumped up on the plank, slinging the soil over the wall. Andy let out an expletive-filled yell. Elizabeth peeked over the wall. Andy stood there covered from head to talon in dirt and was furiously wiping it off, said Rowan, smiling at the memory. What did Andy and the others do? Asked Sparkling, leaning forward on his knees. There was nothing to be done. By the time that they had thought to get around the wall to see who would cover them in the smelly dirt, Elizabeth was already back at the dining hall as though nothing had happened, said Ron. Did they ever find out what happened? Who had got them like that? Asked Samuel. Oh, they had an idea, but they never had got any proof. The wheelbarrow and the plank were moved back into the shed later that night when everyone had gone back to sleep, so there was never any proving who did it. Andy and his friends just had to go and wash themselves off and live with the embarrassment of having one pulled over them for once. They were cowed for a while. They couldn't get the smell of the dirt off them for days. It was mixed with mulch, you see, old yard and waste trimming, said Rowan. Really? Asked Saverly, crinkling her nose. Oh, yes, they smelled awfully for quite a few days after, said Rowan. That's very funny, said Barkley. I'll have to ask her about it when we get back home. You do that, said Rowan. How did you know about the story? Asked Rose. Who do you think helped put the wheelbarrow back in the shed that night? Replied Rowan stoically. The other group looked at each other and started laughing. You helped her, said Barkland. Yes, Barkland, it is possible for older folks to be friends, said Ron. Barkland smiled sheepishly. Sure, but aren't you a bit older than Mum? Asked Barkland. Yes, but when you go to the same school, the groups tend to intermix and groups of friends can oblige, said Rowan. I doubt that you're all the same age. I know Barkland, Samuel, and I are born in the same year, but in different seasons. But when were you born, Averly? Asked Rose. I'm not sure. Velderon found me on the street when I was a couple of years old, so I have no idea my real age, but for my height I must be a year or two older than you, I would think. There's no way to know, though, said Averly. That's unfortunate. Do you celebrate a birthday? Asked Samuel. I've never had one. No, said Averly. Well, that's no good, said Rowan. Yes, that'll not do. What's your favorite season? Asked Rose. Well, I like the fall season, the way the leaves change color and watching them fall as the air turns crisp just before the winter sets in. That's my favorite season, starting before we start bundling up for winter, said Averly. Well, here's what we'll do. When we get a nice day that you've decided is well enough, we'll designate it as your birthday, and we'll celebrate it by making you a little cake and having a party. All right? Said Rose. Is that what's usually done on a birthday? Asked Averly. Usually, that and some sort of little party between close friends and family celebrating another year of having a good life, said Barkland. That would be wonderful, said Averly. What kind of cake would you like? Asked Rose. Something with cherries, if possible. I used to go and sit in front of some of the bakeries of some of the towns we would travel through, and one we passed through when I was young had this multi-layered ringed cake with these large red cherries. I would love a cake with cherries in it. I've never had anything like that before, said Averly. Rose nodded. All right, I can do that, said Rose. I can't believe you've never had a birthday before, said Samuel. Averly shrugged. It's never occurred to me to want one, said Averly. Well, we shall make sure you don't go another year without having one, said Barkland. The others nodded. Averly laid back on her bedroll and looked up at the stars, peering between the tendrils of smoke that passed over her vision from the fire pit. It's still nice to be able to see the open sky each night, said Averly. Rose flopped down, staring up at the sky, and smiled. Yes, it is. One day we'll be able to travel to lands far away enough to see different stars entirely. That would be a magical time, said Rose. Averly turned on her side and looked at Rose. You think we'll be able to do that? Asked Averly. Rose stretched out her legs, getting comfortable. Oh, yes, I'm sure we will. It's one of my goals, anyway. I want to travel to as many of the places the world has to offer, if I can, to learn as much as I can. This trip to the Azerland ruins is just the beginning, I hope. Once we've found the Amberstones, I think we'll be able to travel wherever we want and learn whatever we want, said Rose, her eyes starting to close. And Rose began to settle into her bedroll with a smile on her face. Averly watched her a moment longer and smiled. We'd best call it a night and get some rest, said Rowan. We have an early start tomorrow and a long day ahead of us. The group agreed and laid down on their bedrolls. Barkland finished his current page and thumbed the corner with his claw, placing the book in his satchel at the top of his bedroll. He lay down and got comfortable. They fell asleep wordlessly as the fire churned against the night sky and awoke to the morning's ashes and coals to greet them. So I just signed up for Anchor's funding platform for the podcasters. It seems like a better deal than Patreon at the moment. So I would ask that you click the button that says donate and maybe donate $1 or $5 or $10 a month to us so that we can keep going. And I can produce almost daily or daily podcasts or more in the way that I've been going. And I'll produce book after book after book after book, and then I'll read through them. And I I'll keep doing that until I can't see an end to it. It's so much fun. It really is. So please go to anchor.fm/divergentmind and click the donate button, and that'll help me out a whole bunch. Thank you so much, Jay. Please visit anchor.fm/divergentmind to leave a message so that I may get back to you. Thank you. Have a nice day. Hi everybody. So I've made a new store called animalquest.shop, and I made my first shirt, Barkland Reading, at the Amberstone's house, and I would ask that you go and buy those there. I'll make a few bucks each time you buy something from there, and I have men, women's, baby clothing, and buttons, as well as other accessories, including dog bandanas, which I think are pretty cool. And I'll be adding more merch every week or two for that store as the stories progress and the sequels are written and read. I'll do the same for Divergent Mind. The link again is animalquest.shop. The link for Divergent Mind will be divergentmind.shop as well. Thank you so much. Jay. Okay, so I just wanted to let you know that I have a YouTube channel called Taught Myself, and that I've decided to start selling merch already with a phrase that my brother showed me saying, "My disability is invisible," of which I made a hat for myself. So I decided to make hats, shirts, hoodies, for both men and women on Spreadshirt.com. All you have to do is search for "My disability is invisible." It's in green, and that's mine. You'll know it's me because when you click the sale icon, the same little Divergent Mind icon comes up, and I hope you'll support me. I make about $5 per shirt or per sale. Everything else goes to Spreadshirt, but that's okay because it's still a better deal than a lot of other places. And I really hope you'll support me. Come check me out on the YouTube. Teach me how to do that properly so I can have a community there too. And I await your response. Have a lovely day. Jay.
Hey people, take a listen to the Divergent Mind podcast. You get both insight into living with a serious mental illness and get to listen to a lovely tale about a journey cute little animals need to take. Don't miss out, and remember, divergent minds don't need to think alike.
Please go to ratethispodcast.com/divergentmind and tell me what you think. Thank you very much. Yours truly, Jay.